one episode simply wasn't enough to break down everything that's been going on around the Grizzlies. So guess what? We're gonna recap the game. We're gonna recap that ugly loss, but we're gonna talk about this traded player exception that the Grizzlies picked up. We're gonna break down this pick swap trade. We might talk about Josh Christopher a little bit. Just stay tuned right here, right now, coming up on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. Today is my last full day in Las Vegas. I'm getting out of here. I gotta catch this flight and get up out of here. Vegas has done its number on me. These people stay up around here, and my body is saying ship me back to Memphis. But want to appreciate you guys for tuning in today to Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you continue to tune in everywhere. Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen or watch your podcast. Locked On Grizzlies is there. Make sure you continue to rate, subscribe, all of that good stuff as well. So we got a lot to break down, as I alluded to at the top of the show. So much happened over the weekend. So much has happened around the Grizzlies in the last 3 days. The 30 minutes in the first show was just not enough, but that's what we got 5 episodes a week for. We can kind of spread this out a little bit, break this down, because none of this is going to change necessarily real soon. But today's show, we're going to talk about this traded player exception that the Grizzlies picked up in this Dillon Brooks signing trade, a trade that became official over the weekend. We're going to break down this game between the Grizzlies and the Cavaliers on yesterday. Grizzlies suffered an ugly loss in that game. A lot to break down from that one. And then we're going to break down that pick swap trade, which is going to be very confusing. I'm going to repeat myself a couple times, so just stick with me, bear with me, and we'll get through it together. So it's going to be a fun show today. Again, no Joe Monax. My guy's out pretty much for the rest of this week. He might pop up. You never know with Joe. He might pop up one day this week out of nowhere and surprise me and surprise you. But not expecting Joe to be here this week. He's getting some well-deserved vacation time with the fam. But let's jump into it, because one of the more interesting things that happened over the weekend was the Grizzlies getting involved with a five-team sign and trade deal that involved Dillon Brooks leaving the Grizzlies, going to Houston and signing that mega deal that he signed, and Josh Christopher, Houston Rockets guard, young Houston Rockets guard, 2021 draft, same year as Zion Williams, being shipped to the Grizzlies. First round pick in that draft as well. I think he was 24th pick. Being shipped to the Grizzlies. And you might have wondered, what did the Grizzlies get out of that? Because that's going to be a theme as we talk about these two trades that we're going to break down. What do both teams, what comes of this? Why did the Grizzlies want to get involved? Well, I've kind of alluded to it for a while. The Grizzlies have been very, very, very open to the idea of a sign and trade with Dillon Brooks. That's why, if you go back, remember that report that came out from The Athletic where it said the Grizzlies didn't want Dillon Brooks back under any circumstances in that whole situation. I'm just going to say it like this. A lot of people in Memphis weren't happy. A lot of people who have influence in Memphis were not happy when that report came out, because there was kind of some thought that could end up hurting their chances of securing a sign and trade, because now it shows that you don't really value Dillon Brooks like some teams may have believed you valued him, or whatever the case may be. But anyways, all that's just to say it ended up working out. It ended up working out. The Grizzlies got involved in this sign and trade. And the Grizzlies' biggest benefit for this sign and trade depends on what you value the most. They got two things out of this. They got Josh Christopher, a young guard, still has some potential. I mean, I'm talking averages more than 20 points per game in the G League. We're we're going to break down more on Josh Christopher in a future episode of Locked On Grizzlies. So I don't want to belabor that point. But then the Grizzlies pick up a traded player exception. And this is where things get interesting in terms of the traded player exception. What does it mean? How do you use it? What do you do with it? So many questions can come up when you're talking about a traded player exception. Now, basically, the thing with a traded player exception is teams in signing trades. Again, the Grizzlies shipped out Dillon Brooks, his salary contract. You can pick up a traded player exception, and what that traded player exception allows you to do is whatever the salary of that exception is, you can go out and make a trade for a player, use that exception. Let's say, and I'm just going to throw some numbers out. We're going to get to the numbers of this exact TPE in a second, but I just want to roughly throw some numbers out just so this makes sense to people who probably don't understand what a traded player exception is. The Grizzlies gained a traded player exception by trading away Dillon Brooks in a sign and trade. And basically, with that TPE, the Grizzlies can go out, let's say it's a $9 million trade player exception. They can go out and say, hey, this guy's making $8.6 million for the Jazz. Let's go acquire that player. And you do not have to send out matching salaries. You don't have to say, we have to trade Zion Williams. We have to trade, John Conchar or whoever, whatever the case may be. You can simply say cash considerations, or you could throw a pick, or you can throw a player with a small salary, or just unload a contract that you want to unload. It can be very simple because the traded player exception is designed to kind of eat that salary for you. So that's the benefit of it. Now getting into this particular one, I know there have been some, misconceptions about the numbers out there. Part of that is, on my part as well. I did, earlier this week in a story, I was estimating the numbers, and I threw out a pretty large number. That's not, a good indicator of what this trade player exception will be for the Grizzlies. So that, I do apologize for that because at the end of the day, this is where that number came from, and this is more of what the real number will look like. I'm going to just read the current collective bargaining agreement as it talks about the player exception, and then I'll break it down. So it says, subject to the rules, it's talking about a standard player exception here. Subject to the rules set forth in, Section 2E above, a team may use the standard traded player exception to replace one traded player with one or more replacement players whose player contracts are acquired simultaneously or non-simultaneously, and whose post-assignment salaries for the salary cap year in which the replacement players are required in the aggregate are no more than the amount to 100% of the pre-trade salary of the traded player plus $250,000 provided that any player contract acquired non-simultaneously pursuant to this exception must be acquired within 1 year following the date on which the traded player was traded. I just said a lot, but the only thing that you as a Grizzlies fan really need to zero in on that is that no more than the amount equal to 100% of the pre-trade salary of the player. Dillon Brooks' pre-trade salary was a little bit more than $11 million. This is where some of the misconceptions came because when the Houston Rockets' first initial contract came out, you saw 4 years, $80 million being roughed around, which is where I kind of, threw out the estimate that the TPE could create, could be up to $20 million for the Grizzlies. But that won't be the case because if you remember the last collective bargaining agreement, one of the biggest traded player exceptions we've ever seen was the Gordon Hayward traded player exception. Gordon Hayward's traded player exception was huge because he signed a mega deal, I think for around $28 million a year, going from Boston, a sign and trade from Boston to Charlotte. And that deal, that sign and trade was pretty much the same amount as the traded player exception that Boston picked up. So Hayward's outgoing salary, not his pre-trade salary, his outgoing salary allowed the Celtics to pick up a massive trade exception at that time. So I used that one for reference. But at the end, as it outlined in the newest collective bargaining agreement, the pre-trade salary is what matters here, which means the Grizzlies around $11 million, right? $11.4 million is roughly what Dillon Brooks' pre-trade salary was. And then you got to factor in the contracts that were moved in this deal. In particular, you had Josh Christopher's contract, and then I believe Isaiah Todd, who the Grizzlies acquired as well. His contract will also be involved in this deal as well. So just looking at those two players' contracts, Isaiah Todd contract is worth about $1.7 million per season right now. So you factor that in and you kind of just subtract that from the situation as well. And then you do Josh Christopher. Josh Christopher, again, this is a guy who was a first-round pick. So you're not talking about a cheap contract here. You're talking about a guy who has an average salary of close to $3 million. So you'd say $2.8 million there. Then you got about $1.7 million average annual salary for Todd. Put those two together, that's about $4.5 million. Again, this is rough estimates right here. And you take about 4.5 from about 11.5, that gets you about $7 million. So rough estimate. Again, rough estimate. The Grizzlies are looking at a traded player exception of around $7 million. So now that we got that out the way, later on down the road, and I'm going to wait to do this because I want Joe to be here when we do it. The Grizzlies now have $7 million trade player exception. And as I just said, they have about up to a year to take advantage of it. Some teams don't use it. Some teams do use it. But at the end of the day, the Grizzlies can go out and get a contract of up to $7 million, and they won't have to send a salary out to match that deal if they don't choose to do that. So basically, that trade, very small. You know, the Grizzlies were going to give away Dillon Brooks in free agency regardless. But they picked up something valuable in the case. They got a trade player exception, and you took a flyer on a guy in Josh Christopher, who we'll see, but we're going to talk more about him later. And we'll see what he brings to the table for the Grizzlies. Speaking of what these guys are bringing, young guys bringing it to the table for the Grizzlies. Coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk about this last game against the Cavaliers. It was an ugly loss, but we're not focusing on the results. So stay tuned for that. But before we get to that, we got to talk to you about Ibotta, because look, you finally taking that summer vacation, because my vacation is coming up. Joe's taking his vacation right now. So you finally taking that summer vacation that you've been planning, but you're dreading buying all of these necessities, right? You got to buy this. You got to buy that. It's time to stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything in return. And that's what Ibotta is here for. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce, personal care, pantry goods, and you can make sure you're beating the inflation no matter what you're purchasing. You either link your loyalty account, or you can upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's just that simple. And look, the average Ibotta user earns up to $120 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. I know, look, $120, I'm just one person. That can get me by. Or you could just use your cash back to buy that flight you've been eyeing, right? Or that game that you're dying to get. 2K's coming out soon. Madden's coming out soon. Or you could just go get that fancy dinner if you want to just please yourself. But either way it goes, you can get hundreds back in online brands and retailers too, all through Ibotta. And I'm talking through Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora. All you got to do is Best Buy, and even more. All you got to do right now, Ibotta is offering listeners $5 for just trying Ibotta using the code LOCKED when you register. So just go to the App Store right now. Download the free Ibotta app. That's IBOTTA. Go download the app and put in the code LOCKED. That's LOCKED right now. Coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to break down the game from the Grizzlies versus the Cavaliers. It wasn't pretty, but we got to talk about it. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee. Getting ready to end my trip in Vegas. Had a good time out here. Got a lot of good intel that I'm going to share with you guys over the course of the next week. So stay tuned for that as well as we break down what we learned, the sights and the sounds and everything from Vegas Summer League. But now we got to talk about the most recent game here, and that was against the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Grizzlies lost this game, so their first loss in Vegas, and it was ugly. It was a 100-77 loss, and at the end of the day, ugly loss, but I've told you guys time and time again, this isn't about results. This is more about the process. I know it sounds probably cliche and sounds like I'm being Coach Damichael over here or whatever, but I talked to Coach after the game, Vitaly Potapinko. We talked to David Roddy and whatnot, and neither of them really sounded happy. They weren't happy after the game, so to speak. But that's because they want to win. I think you as the fan who cares if they win right now? I mean, I get it from their perspective. They're competitors. You want to win. You're not playing just to lose. But for the fan, I think there were a lot of things, especially on offense. There were a lot of defensive breakdowns, so we can get to that later. But offensively, I think there were a lot of things that were impressive, actually, to me in this game. And I want to start with David Roddy. Because David Roddy, in a way, he has a Zaire Williams thing. And the Zaire Williams thing is, everyone knows I've talked about this a lot. Zaire Williams is a great mid-range shooter. When the Grizzlies allow him to be that guy, he gets to those spots. You see Zaire Williams playing his best basketball. Guess what? David Roddy is a guy we call Big Body Roddy. But if you go back to last season, you saw Big Body Roddy taking long-range three-point shots equivalent to guys 170, 180 pounds in the league. No, Roddy is 6'4", 6'5", 250 pounds with these big, broad shoulders. Like, get downhill and abuse these matchups. He has the ability to do that. And guess what? I think that's going to be a key to his evolution as a player going forward. He can't just be a corner man his entire career, just shooting spot-up shots. He's not that great of a shooter, at least not yet. Has the potential to be a much better three-point shooter, but not yet. He's got to add something. The defensive versatility is nice and whatnot, but check this out. 18 points, 5 assists, 5-11 shoot from the field. Yeah, that's all right. 0 of 3 from three-point range. Okay, so what? 8 of 11 from the free throw line is what stood out to me. 8 of 11 for David Roddy, because David Roddy has the size, the frame of a guy who can get downhill. And if you watch the game, a lot of it was him attacking the basket, getting there strong with the ball. And David Roddy's a big dude. So he's going to get hit. I know I've said it on here before about conversations I've had with him in the past about, he feels like because he's a big guy, sometimes he doesn't get, the same calls as smaller players. And yeah, that is, the downside of being bigger than a lot of guys who are guarding you. But David Roddy taking advantage of that is going to be the next evolution to me for him as an offensive basketball player. He is bigger than a lot of these guys, and he can get downhill. Now, the other side of that, if you want me to talk about the negative side, is David Roddy isn't necessarily the quickest guy in the world. So when he's playing against elite defenders, he's probably not going to be able to just beat them off the dribble. Even in his Cav game, he got a couple I would call bailout type calls where he got downhill, but he didn't have an angle of getting to the rim, and he just throw the ball up and, they'd hit him and foul him and whatnot. But that won't happen against better NBA defenders who are just better at moving their feet and being in better position. So, again, that is going to be the next evolution for David Roddy, just taking advantage of that size advantage that he's going to have pretty much probably every night. Jake LaRavia, I won't touch too much on it because I've said the same thing over and over. Yes, he shot 5 of 14 from the field, but he took 12 three-pointers, and he was 5 of 12 from three-pointers. Ladies and gentlemen, that's 41.7%. 5 of 12 from three-point range. Quite frankly, if Jake LaRavia is chugging 12 threes and making 5, imagine that. If you got John Morant, Desmond Bane on the floor, Jaren Jackson Jr., Steven Adams clobbing up all the offensive rebounds in the world, and you got Jake LaRavia at small forward knocking down 5 of 12 threes. I don't have to say too much more. Next, Kenneth Lofton Jr.'s consistency has stood out to me from the standpoint of another night, 15 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, playmaking stands out again. had 4 steals. And after the game, I kind of wanted to talk about his defense a little bit. Coach wasn't buying it. Potapinko, just felt like the team struggled as a whole. He didn't want to single out Kenneth Lofton Jr. I get it. But 4 steals from him, which goes to my point. Very active hands. You can talk about, yes, he's not above the rim type guy. He got 1 block. He's not going to be meeting guys at the rim too often, but he kind of makes up for with his ability to get steals. It reminds me of DeMarcus Cousins. DeMarcus Cousins is probably better at taking charges. Haven't really seen Junior take too many charges, but DeMarcus Cousins had real good hands, in the prime of his career, which allowed him to be such an effective center because he wasn't, jumping up and meeting guys at the rim, so to speak. He was never the most athletic guy from that perspective, but he would get his hands on a lot of basketballs, and that's something that Kenneth Lofton Jr. has done a real good job of as well. So, again, those 3 guys, what they did really stood out to me. We'll talk more about G.G. Jackson, Jacob Gilyard. We got to really dive in on Jacob Gilyard real soon, too, because his roster spot is a big one. And some of you may think he's holding the fort real good. Some of you may think that's one that could open up. We're going to talk about that later in a future episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But in this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we got to talk about one more trade. The Dillon Brooks signing trade wasn't the only recent Grizzlies trade. I'm going to talk about that coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. And we're breaking down the trades. We're breaking down the games. And now we got to break it down this pick swaps deal between the Grizzlies and the Suns. Probably didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, I think this was a smart move. It's one of those moves, could be something, could be nothing. So let's get to the why. At the end of the day, I said it earlier, this is one of those trades, for me, I had to look at what this did for the Suns to really understand what it can do for the Grizzlies, if that makes sense. The Grizzlies traded 3 second-round picks for 2 pick swaps. The first thing you should know about pick swaps is they're swaps, meaning if the team that you want to swap with, the Suns in this case, if they end up with a better record than you, then you're probably not going to swap. Because they're going to be lower in the draft order. So you're basically betting on yourself to have a better record than that team. And the years that the Grizzlies did first-round pick swaps with the Suns is 2024 and 2030. We'll get to why that's important later. But let's get back to the 3 second-round picks. The Suns, in recent trades, to acquire Kevin Durant, to acquire Bradley Beal, they've pretty much just dished out all of their draft capital. First-round picks, second-round picks. So getting 3 second-rounders from the Grizzlies kind of helps the Suns replenish that. And the 3 second-rounders, 2025, 2028, 2029. So the 2025 one is via the Pelicans, so the Grizzlies will still have their pick, but they give 2028, 2029. The pick swaps, 2024 and 2030. The first thing you should know about these pick swaps is this. The Suns, in a separate deal with the Washington Wizards, already agreed to pick swaps in 2024 and 2030 with the Washington Wizards. So this is the Suns agreeing to another pick swap with the Phoenix Suns. The Suns agreeing to another pick swap with the Grizzlies, in the same years. Stick with me because this is about to get real complicated. This is some real I don't know what you made in chemistry, but this reminds me of one of those complicated physics equations. But anyways, let's break it down. So basically, it's a 3-team pick swap. And the Grizzlies in this case get second preference behind the Wizards. So let's say the Suns, between the 3 teams, 2024, this is the upcoming draft, right? First round pick swaps. If the Suns just have a terrible season, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant get hurt, and Bradley Beal is having to carry a team full of scrubs. They have a terrible season, and they finish with a top 5 pick in the draft. If that's the case for Phoenix, the Wizards finish with a better record, and let's say the Wizards end up with the 10th pick in the draft, and the Grizzlies have a successful season, they end up picking 24th, 25th. Let's say those are your standard numbers. In that case, the Grizzlies would get the 10th pick. They would get the Wizards pick, and the Wizards would move up and get the Suns' top 5 pick. So there's a potential that the Wizards pick could be rerouted to the Grizzlies because of these pick swaps. Because at the end of the day, the Suns agreed to pick swaps with 2 teams, meaning the Suns could move back twice in the draft from this. The Grizzlies are now looped into this, and they could end up with the Wizards pick. That's how this works out. It's very complicated, but in the simplest form, if the Suns have a worse record than the Grizzlies have a chance to attain the pick swap. It's that simple. If the Suns have a worse record, because I'm just going to go out on a limb, looking at the Wizards roster, and look, hey man, I like Tyus Jones, I like Jordan Poole, like Kyle Kuzma, but they ain't about to do a lot of winning over there. Not yet, at least. Not about to be a lot of winning over there in DC. So not really predicting them to be a team that's going to be high up in the playoff standings. But the Suns and the Grizzlies should be. So the Grizzlies are betting on themselves with this 2024 pick, basically saying we're going to finish with a better record than the Suns, or hoping that they're going to finish with a better record than the Suns. And if that's the case, the Grizzlies get to move up. They get to move up, and that pick swap, it's going to be minor probably, but it could make a difference. Now, the real potential gem is the 2030 pick swap. That's the real gem in this one. It's the real gem for Washington, really. But it could be a gem for the Grizzlies too, for every reason that we just outlined. Washington has first dibs, basically. And in 2030, that's what, 7 years from now, Kevin Durant will be in his 40s. So probably won't be in the NBA anymore. Bradley Beal will be in his late 30s, I think. Bradley Beal's just turned 30. So he'll be 36 going on 37 at that time. So Bradley Beal will be either at the end of his career or he'll been ended his career as well. Devin Booker probably will still be in a decent part of his career where he's still an all-star caliber player at that point. But at the end of the day, the Suns don't have much draft capital or resources to put around Devin Booker going forward. Their resources are DeAndre Ayton. Their resources are Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal going forward. Everything else around those guys is going to change drastically in the next 4 years. So with that being said, when you get to 2030, the Suns are probably going to suck real bad. Like, it's hard for me to see that team being good when you get to 2030. Since the Suns are probably going to be bad, let's say they're top 5 pick bad, the Wizards are just going to be licking their chops, because if the Wizards win decently, that's a pick swap that's just easy pick swap where they should get a lottery pick in that case, and it's nothing the Suns can do about it. How does that affect the Grizzlies? Is the Grizzlies core is very young, Ja, Dez, Jaren. Those guys will probably still be around in Memphis at that point, or Memphis will still probably be competitive. They should be, at least. The Wizards are the other team, and again, I like what the Wizards are building over there. I think Jordan Poole is probably the first real foundational piece. I don't consider Kyle Kuzma. I mean, I know a lot of people in Grizzlies Nation were high on Kyle Kuzma or whatever, but I don't consider him like a franchise cornerstone. He's a great player, but not a guy who I think is like, oh, this can be your number 2 on a championship team. So with that being said, I think the Wizards still need to find those pieces that are going to put them into the playoff hunt consistently. And until I see that, because right now I don't think they have it. Until I see that, I'm going to say the Wizards are a team that could potentially be in the lottery as well. Which means, if you're looking at 2030, the Suns pick may be in the lottery. The Wizards pick may be in the lottery. Again, this is a long way from now. Who knows what happens? Like, every guy that I just named on the Suns may end up getting traded to DC. You just never know. Like LeBron might be 47 years old playing with those guys. You never know. But anyways, the point is I'm just projecting based on current roster layout, young cores and whatnot. And the Wizards right now don't entice me as a team with the greatest future in the world. If the Wizards and the Suns are in the lottery and the Grizzlies potentially are being competitive because they'll still likely have, Jaren Jadez core at that point, unless things just aren't going good. There's a chance for the Grizzlies to earn something with that pick swap and potentially jump from the mid-20s, maybe the late 20s or the early 20s and jump up into the lottery. So again, it's 2030. It's not much of anything, but it's a pick swap. We got to talk about it because it's going to be relevant one day, and you're going to say, you know what? I remember that pick swap that Michael was talking about, and it became relevant for the Grizzlies, but it's going to be relevant in 2024 first. We'll see what happens. You never know what happens. Like, injuries can change an entire season. Suns might be bad. Wizards might be bad, and the Grizzlies could be in position to end up with a pretty good pick swap. We'll see how all of that plays out. But I want to thank you again for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies today. Make sure you continue to tune in to Locked On Grizzlies because we got a lot to talk about for the rest of this week. Got to break down Josh Christopher, the newest Grizzly. What does he bring to the table? Can he impact this roster as well? And is he a potential player who has staying power on this roster past the preseason? We're going to talk about all of that coming up on Locked On Grizzlies. But thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies today. Really appreciate you. And remember, Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you on Locked On.